Thanks, Yiru, and thanks, Satya. So there's not much of a chat so far, so I really don't know how the lesson is going. But you have anything, you should put it on chat. So the first job that we are going to get done is installation. Okay? So we want to install STS, which is the Spring Tool Suite. Why is this necessary? It's necessary for us because there are a lot of tools that we will use for us to be able to develop this application. Is this very different from Eclipse? No, it's just the Eclipse with some additional plugins. Okay? So some of you will ask me, why can't I use the update in the Eclipse and then upgrade? The reason I'm going to insist on you trying to pick the STS tool, which is the Spring Tool Suite, is because this is well integrated and tested. You take a new version of Eclipse and then you connect to the Spring Tool Suite. There are a lot of compatibility issues. Okay? So that's why we want to stick to this particular Spring Tool Suite. So I'm going to spend the next say 15-20 minutes to show you how the installation happens. I'll push this video into the YouTube so that you'll be able to watch that and then be able to repeat the setup in your workspace. So I would highly recommend that you try the installation quickly, and if there is any installation issues, we'll see how to sort it, and then we can get started with the Spring Boot application development. I'm assuming all of you will have Workbench. Okay? So you've already used MySQL, you have used MySQL Workbench. So this two installation is sorted. So only additional installation here is Spring Tool Suite. So let's get started here. Okay? So the first thing that you need is to download a Self-Extracting Exe. So you're going to go into Spring STS download. So you can see that it automatically points you to Tools Spring. Okay, so this is the website. So I'm going to point you to the website in the chat so that you can take a look at it if you are using this. Okay. So one of you wants to use Hidi. Yes, go ahead. I mean, as long as it works for you. So you're going to do a lot of Spring. So as long as you have the plugins necessary for the MVC and Webflux, you should be fine. Okay. So you can have whichever IDE you are comfortable with. You can even use IntelliJ if you're keen. But I only advise is don't pressurize your team. Okay. So there are many beginners in the class. They are basically picking up these tools from the demos that we are doing. Right. So you use it, but when you give the codes to your team, make sure that they can get it in the way they want, because IDEs conform to standards differently. So I would recommend, if you're using a different IDE, export your code as a jar file or war file and then pass it to your friends so that they'll be able to import or integrate. That's the only concern. Otherwise you're free to choose anything. You can choose My Eclipse if you want, you can choose IntelliJ, you can use nobody's NetBeans fan these days, Hidi if you want, any tool is fine. So here if you see, the Spring Tool Suite that we are talking about has got multiple versions. It extends its support to Eclipse. You can use that in Visual Studio. You can also use that in Thea. You can also use that in Atom. You can also use that in a few other IDEs as plugin. Okay? So you can pick whatever IDE that you want. I'm going to stick to Eclipse because we are familiar with that. Okay? So and then I'm going to pick that version of a Spring tool for Eclipse. And I don't know what different operating systems you have. Some of you have MacBooks, some of you have Linux, many of you have Windows. I don't have a Mac, I have a Linux, but I think that will stress you because my Linux is kernel Linux. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick with the Windows machines I have. My laptop as well as the PC that I'm using for these kind of workshops here are very predominantly going to be using Windows. Okay, so I'm going to work on Windows, and if you are doing Mac, I would expect you to pick the equivalent installation and manage things. Not very difficult these days. So Mac OS guys can pick this, and I'm going to pick the self-extracting. So the moment you click that, you can see that it downloads a self-extracting exe. I tested it yesterday night when I wanted to recreate the instruction. So you can see that it creates a self-extracting jar file by this name. So it says Spring Tool Suite 444 release, whatever it is. Okay? And then what you can do is you can copy the file and then bring it to the C drive. Okay? And then you can paste it anywhere that you want. Okay? And all you got to do is just extract it. Okay? So you just go to the website, you pick the right operating system, and then you get the self-extracting exe, move the file into the C drive, and what you do with that is you just extract it. So when you say extract it, all you have to do is just double click it, and when you double click it, you can see that it extracts a folder on whatever is the release that you're working with. So in this you can see that I'm using the STS4, the version, the number that I'm using is 462. Okay, so that's the latest release. So you can see that it has created a folder for me when I double click and extract. Okay, so I can show you again. I can delete this folder and then show it again how it gets created. So you can see it's a bit large file, so it's taking time. I should have deleted it yesterday. Let's show you again. It's not a good decision, takes up my time. Never mind. In the class we have been using Eclipse, right? Yes, right? But the problem is it's not friendly for all this cloud data and other things that we are going to do now. So, because I'm running the code maybe? Okay, so I'm going to say cancel. I hope that it is not corrupted. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll go to the drive. I'll make sure that I close my code, exit. So I was running some codes. Okay, so let me go and delete that first. So in the class we used Eclipse, right? This is again Eclipse, don't panic. It's just Eclipse but bundled with the right tools. So you're going to see that you're going to see the Eclipse again but with some more tools, that's all. Okay? So this tools will help you to do JPA much faster, it will help you to do web controllers much faster, and so on and so forth. Okay? So I'm not going to re-architect anything, I'm just trying to use a specific tool here. You can still use Eclipse for your Java practices, but for Spring I think it is better that we use this version of Eclipse. This is also Eclipse. So if you look at this self-extracting jar file, just double click it, okay? And then you can see that it starts self-extracting in the C drive. Okay? So normally you would have done Eclipse and then you implement those things inside the Eclipse, right? So here you can see it is self-extracting, right? So it's a jar file and a JVM runs to extract these things. You can also run your Java codes in STS. Yes, it's a superset. Your understanding of it is right. Yeah, I know some of you are getting anxious. Yes. So STS is basically a super Eclipse. Okay? So whatever you did in Eclipse you can do here, plus a lot more cool stuff. That's all. It's a bigger version of the Eclipse. Okay? Hope it settles. Yeah. So give it some time. Not very difficult. You can also use the old workspace if you want, but I recommend creating a new workspace and then trying Spring things different from the regular Java. Okay, so that should be helpful. So you see what happens is when I extract the file, it again creates this folder for me. Okay. So if you open up this is the Spring Tool Suite. So you can create a shortcut for this, right? So I'm going to create a shortcut. I'm going to call this as rename it. I'm going to call this as SA50 Spring. Right? So this is the SA50 version of Spring. I have too many of them, so I like to name them by batch. Right? Spring. And I'm going to send this to desktop. So send it to desktop so that I have a copy of the shortcut. It's up to you. you can come to C drive every time and then start the application if you like it that way. I like to have things on the desktop so that it's easy for me to start. So I've created a shortcut and I've put that on the desktop here. So as you can see, what I did is I downloaded the self-extracting jar file from the website that I've just shared, right, the HTTPS Spring tool. Then I moved this file to C drive, right, and then I extracted it, and then this has created a folder for me which is nothing but C whatever is your release number. So it creates a folder like that. Okay. So once it is created, then I can go inside there and created a shortcut for me to use. Okay. So that's all I did. So I'm going to open and show you how the IDE looks like, so you can familiarize yourself with that. It's not very difficult. It's exactly the same Eclipse, right? So this was the shortcut that I created. This is the other one, so I'm going to delete that, right? So this is the shortcut I created. So you can see the properties. It will be connecting to the C drive and the extracted file that we just called, right? C drive, STS version, and the exact version. So when I double click it, you can see the IDE starts. Okay, the logo is a bit different because it's a 40-byte set of tools, but this is sitting on top of Eclipse, right? So there are some fantastic tools that Spring has put on top of the Eclipse and sort of giving you a fortified version. By default, what it does is it gives you a folder suggestion. It says C user, and let me check if I have any SA50. I don't have, I think. Okay. So you can see by default it points me to the C user documents and the Spring release of it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my workspace simple. I'm going to say SA50 Spring. Right. So I'm going to keep my workspace as SA50 Spring. So this way I don't have a problem pointing to this workspace every single time. That's all it is. Okay. So when I say launch, you can see that it launches the STS. Okay. So this should basically help me to do the installation. So that's pretty much it, right? So when you open, you can see it exactly is your Eclipse. Okay. So you have this Java perspective here. I'm sure it's the same perspective that you used along with thin, but when you click on the open perspective, you will see that a few more things come in. So inside these standard plugins, they basically put in a lot of Spring tools, that's all. Okay. So it's not a new IDE, it is just some additional tools. One of the main tool that the Spring has put here, as you can see, is this boot dashboard. Do you see that? So this allows you to test your applications locally, and then this way it is easy for you to push your applications to the cloud later on. Okay. So we'll try some of these things. Right now there is no services, so we will build an application, we'll run it locally, okay. And then the same application, if you have an AWS account, you can push it to AWS or anything. There are a lot of chaos coming to JDK path and things like that. I'll explain that. Please hold on, right? So hold on, Martin. Virtual machine is not found. I'll come to this, right? Yeah. Are we going to use AWS? I mean, you can, okay? But if time permits, I'll show you all these things. So this is the latest version. So that's why you can see I picked this. And what we are going to work on as projects are going to be here. Very exactly the same style that you did it on Tin's class, you know, so it's the same thing. But you see there are some additional stuff that we can create. So let us explore this a moment. Okay. Then I'll address all your questions. Then you can go back and try whatever coding that we are doing in your workshop, and then of course if you have trouble, I'll try to come in a little early to troubleshoot. I want most of your installation problems to be sorted. Okay. Amongst yourself, if you're a bit fast, you set up your machine and your friend is having a problem, can I please ask you to help your friends? Okay. So because you see a ratio of 1:69 is going to go crazy. Even I had a 20 people big data session last week, and that was even really taking a lot of time for us to troubleshoot things. So in your case, it's going to be even more challenging. So I would like your friends to chip in and try. So I want you to familiarize with this. So when you open your workspace, you shouldn't have any problem. Please point to a new workspace folder, and you see, get yourself familiar with these tools. I'm going to talk about the environment variables in a bit. So that's okay. And environment variable is not mandatory for this particular IDE, but it is good to have if you have a Mac machine particularly. So I'm going to talk about it. Don't worry, don't get excited, but let me finish the demo to show you how to test a very simple application to see if your environment is working fine. Okay, so let's do that first, then I'll come and take in all your questions. I know many questions are being posted. So you regularly are very used to creating a Java project, right? So normally when Tin was teaching class, you will always say create a Java project, and then you create a project and you put your codes there. You did I think my club application is surviving so many years. I'm very proud. I'm sure you did this facility, member, all these workshops, right? Yeah. I sent you on a wild goose chase when I wanted to create. I didn't teach. I think Tim also would have followed the same. We didn't teach you toString. We asked you to write a method called display, and you were wondering what on earth are we trying to do. So that's an interesting case study. We're going to extend that here as well, some of it. So that'll be fun to try. So those kind of simple projects is what you call it as the Java project. From today, what we are going to do is we are going to create Spring project. It's a bit sophisticated, but please be with me so that I can explain what's happening, and then we can learn it together. So if you go to the file menu, if you go into the new menu here, you will see that normally there are three main menus, right? Don't worry about doing it immediately. Some of it is being pushed to YouTube, so you can try offline, replay and catch from there. Right? So you are very used to Spring project. What we are going to use is the Spring Starter project. So this is going to help us build different kinds of applications quite easily. So that's coming from Spring Boot. That's the benefit of it. Okay? You can also have a lot of tutorials, which I'll show you in the afternoon how to use those tutorials. There are a lot of small projects that are available. Each project will cost you 20 minutes, so you can, if you find something that's being discussed in the class very difficult, you would like to have additional examples, you can come here and use that. I'll teach you how to use that. So what we are going to use for initial starters is basically Spring Starter project, right? So I'm going to click on that, and immediately when I click on that, you can see that it opens up this menu, right? The new Spring Starter application project menu. So you see that we have to spend some time here discussing these things, because these things are going to help you do the Spring setup once and for clear. Okay? So if you get this right, it's easy for you to be able to see what's being discussed, right? So I'm going to use some of this to help me to remember these things when I explain. Of course, I'll give you some instructions in the workshop that you can take back and try. So if you look into the first menu of this Spring project, if you have any questions on this particular wizard, you can type in so that I'll take it immediately. But all the other installation questions, I'll take it a little late. Okay? So you see, this is always coming up from the main repository, and the repository is called Starter Projects from Spring.io. So that one doesn't change. The next interesting thing here is the name of your demo. Okay? For now, I'll just leave it as demo and com example because that's the default. But when you work for companies, I'll show you what happens. Okay, so I'll cut this. I'll show you what happens. Normally, if you work for companies, you start with domain. Suppose I'm working for ISS, right? So I'll say isg.edu because edu is my domain. I can say nus.iss, then give an application name called demo. Right? So this is how I create my package structure. So group usually identifies your main package structure. Why we need that? Because there could be another department in the ISS which is, say for example, SOC, and they do an application called demo. I should be able to differentiate that, right? So or if I have the School of Engineering, SC, and then they are trying to do a demo, then they have to differentiate it. So these package structures are basically like a tree that gives different work namespaces that each of the teams can work. It's very difficult to imagine in terms of NUS, right? So let's talk about an imaginary company, right? So like Google, I have Google. Google is my company. So I have Google, com.google. Then I'm working for the cloud services, right? So I'll say CS is cloud services, and then I'm working for the accounts department. So I'm saying account, and then I'm going to create a demo application. You see, this way so many teams can very harmoniously create packaging structures that don't create conflicts. That's the idea. So your first location is your domain. In our case, it is sg.edu because it's an edu site. If it's a commercial company, it starts with com, then the company name, then the department, then of course any other kind of segregation that you have. This is usually what is the group artifact ID. Then finally is the name, right? So I'll put it back. I'll just have it as com example for simplicity, right? And then this group is exactly how you have to package your folders as well. So that's why you can see whatever you type here has to be typed here as well. Sometimes you miss it. Okay? So keep a watch on it. And group name dot demo together is the packaging structure. You can give a description here. So that's all. Funny thing is you can have other languages, but we are only going to focus on Java. So just leave Java as such. There are two options here. Okay? One is the jar option, the other one is the var option. When you are trying to do web application, we'll try the var options. Okay? But for the first day, we are only going to do simple applications and simple JPA, so we can stick to the jar option. Okay? What is jar? It's a Java archive. Okay? What is var? It is a web archive. You can even do web application as a Java archive, so there's no restrictions, but there are certain folders that gets created when you say var. Okay? I'll talk about it in the afternoon lecture, so you'll see why this is connected this way. Yes, that's important. Then you have to use a build tool, which is very, very important. Okay? Of course, you can have the latest build tool, which is Grader, but that's a bit tough for you to take for starters. I also did a recent survey on the industry landscape in Singapore because I constantly go and teach these kids to go back to industry, right? So Singapore is still predominantly Maven driven, so we will pick Maven, right? So Maven is the build tool we are going to use. Of course, you can try all the others when you're free and whenever you want. So this is what I have to define first for my application. I've given a name, I've given a package structure, I've said what is the group's name and which is the application's name. So application's name is the artifact ID. I picked my programming language, I picked my build tool, I picked my packaging strategy. Okay, so I've done all these things in the first page. Then I move on to the next page. Here is where I can pick the different modules. Okay. So some of you wanted to try Amazon, some of you wanted to try Google, all this fun stuff is here in the Spring Boot, right? So you can see that's why we pick this. This is cloud independent, okay? You can run all these things in different clouds. That's why we call Spring Boot as multi-cloud. Okay? It's a very cool thing. We'll start with basics first, right? So we'll just do very simple things for starters, and then of course we will venture into it. So when I say simple things, you can see that the basic ones are the developer tools. If you want to profile it, you can go in and use this developer tools. We will be looking at SQL for starters. So you can see there's a variety of SQL support that are available. Okay? So think about any popular database. MongoDB is there, Oracle is there, Microsoft SQL is there, H2 is there, IBM is there, okay? MyBatis is there, JPA is there, even our MySQL is there. Okay. So you can see that it's very, very popular. So Spring Data is becoming the new standard for data microservices. So that's why it's cool. What we will be using is the JPA part. Okay. So you can simply say Spring Data JPA for the starters demo. Of course, we can also use MySQL because you want to connect to MySQL. You can also use inbuilt H2 database. So depending on whatever you check, you can see that these things are getting selected on the right side. Okay. For the first iteration, I think these three is good enough. Okay. So we will leave it as such. We will explore other things later. Let's look at the web and the template. So you can see the whole set of string things that you can, cloud things you can do. There are a lot of big data things you can do. Okay. And you can also push it to your, see when you code it this way, you can simply push it to Kubernetes with just one button. You can push it to Docker with just one button. Okay. So that's why these things are quite standardized, and that's why I like it. Of course, I'll try to teach you as much as I can. So these are the basic things. On the web part, what we will do is, we will use the traditional web, which is the Spring Web. Okay. And that's pretty much it. Later on, I'll teach you how to use the HTTP session for starters, so you can take that as well. Okay. So I think that is that is good enough for starters. And the second iteration we will use reactive, heteros and a few other things. Okay. So to summarize, for initial web portions, pick the web and session. Okay. Then of course we can actually change these things anytime you want. So if you look at the testing, there are so many special testing available. You can test for your Mongo, you can test for your REST controller, you can test so many things. But I'm going to just take the default test that comes with the core, so I'm not going to add anything. Okay. So you can see that there is a default core test framework that comes. So I'm happy with that. I'll just use that for starting. There are other things like messaging and a few other things that you can explore as you go along, but this is how you set up your architecture. So right now I have a very simple web application that uses few options on the database, few options on the web, and this is going to become a full stack application as we go along, right? So this is the simplest version. So once you do this selection, what you do is you come here and you see this is the URL that gets generated. Right? So there is a base URL which is the Spring Boot. There is a specific URL that gets generated depending on what you have selected. So I have selected Spring Boot, I have selected Java, I have selected certain kind of dependencies. So you can see that the URL is getting generated depending on the number of checks that I did. When I say finish, you can see that it is going to create a project. Okay. So be mindful of that, that's all. Sometimes you would have done something wrong, you know, at a later time you may want to add some, you may want to remove some and so on and so forth, right? So that comes later. But there is something that I want you to keep your eye always on. The moment you create a project, please look into the problems tab. You shouldn't have any red marks here. Okay? So if you have all these things, then you are good to go. You are ready to start programming. Okay? So that's all it is. So if you look into what gets generated, you can see that there is this very simple application that gets generated. It's called as a demo application. Is that all right? So this demo application is only having a main method, and it allows you to program inside the main method. Okay. So I have a few is asking me about issues. I'll come back to it. Okay. Some laughters. Some of us didn't see. Okay, so are we going to use AWS? Okay, so it's very easy to use EC2, but you don't use EC2. EC2 is old style EN. Right? New style is Elastic Beanstalk. I'll teach you how to do that. So anyway, this is your domain application, right? So you can test it. You right click the application, you say run it as when you come to run as, you will see, normally you will only see Java application, right? Because this is a Spring Boot application, it gives you the Spring Boot app. So when you select that, you can see that it starts. It goes through the Spring Boot app. So this is your console. You got to always work with this console, so keep a watch on it. So you see what happens, even though it's a jar file, even though it's a very simple app, you can see that it internally connects it to a Tomcat server and it opens up the port 8080 for me. Okay, so by default, every project that I create can be run inside a server. Okay. So that's all. And if you have successfully started your application, it will say that the demo application is started and it took around 6.481 minutes for you to try. Okay, so that's quite okay, that's quite straightforward. So let's do a little bit of change here and there so that you can play with this code. Okay. So I'm going to show you how you can use this to do something interesting, okay, and then we finish the demo. Then of course I'll take up all the questions that are pending. So you understand the Spring Boot app, there are certain things that you got to understand. Depending on whatever you have checked, you would have created a file which is called as the Pom file. This is the build file. Okay. So when you're creating this file, you're going to call that as you're basically going to call that as a build file which has got all the dependencies sorted. Okay. So when you go to the Pom file, you can see that you are trying to connect to version 8. You are picking up the Java boot, or whatever selection you have done. Depending on that, there is a dependency chart here, and this is what is going to teach you how to sort your dependencies. So if you come to the dependencies tab, this is the XMR, this is the dependencies. So these are the different plugins that you have used. Now you want to change your mind. Okay. So you just double click on the Pom file, and if you are in the Java perspective, it should work, right? So if you want to change your mind, you want to change the status, what you do is you select the project, you right click the project, and you come to Spring menu. You will see the edit starters. So you can come to edit starter, Please be patient, give it a minute or two. Right? Then you can see it gives you all the things that has already been selected. So you can unselect something, you can add to it. Right? So you can go back to the wizard that we just now did, and you can change the options. But every time you change the option, you should really understand what you're trying to do. Otherwise, you will be basically corrupting the startup files as well as the project. Okay? So please be careful when you edit the boot project. Okay? So these are the main things you got to understand. Now let's try to do some code to see that you can have a familiarity that these things are working. So that's sort of it gives you an understanding of what's being done here. So in the demo, for example, I'm going to create another package. I'm going to call this as my model file. Okay? And inside the model file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a student model file. Oh yeah, everybody creates student. Can we create something else? Maybe I'll say user. Okay? So user is a very simple model file that I've created. And inside the model file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create private string user ID. I have another private string user name. I'm going to say private string nickname. So I have created a very simple object here. I spelled it wrongly, so I'm going to say nickname. And that's fine, right? So I've created these three variables. So I'm sure Tin taught you that you should need constructors, getter, setters. So I need an empty argument constructor because I'm going to later change this to entity. I need a field constructor, so I'm going to call all fields and create a constructor. I'm also going to use the database to create a constructor. So what I'll say is I'll say constructor, selective constructor. So I'll say constructor. From fields, I'll do everything except user ID and then show you how to use that as well. So these are the constructors that I've created. And of course I need getters and setters. It's a bit stupid with OP, but everybody has to do this. Getters and setters. So I select all the getters and setters. Fine. I definitely need a toString because I troubleshoot that often. So I'll say generate toString. So that is you can see that I've created constructors, getter, setters, and toString. Okay. And so this is basically a very simple object that is getting generated. Okay. It's fine. I think this is good enough for me to do the testing. So inside the command runner, okay, I can come back to my demo application here. So this is the main method. What I can do is I can do a testing. So for that you can see the code in the workshop instructions, so don't worry about it. So you can see that you can create a bean, and it is called as the command line. Okay. So I don't know if my font is okay, so let me just increase the font size. Just give me 1 minute. Editor, text editor, colors and fonts, text font right now is 10, is too small. I'll make it 18 or even 21 is good. Right. So you can see that I have basically a command liner, and then I'm going to put in any course that I want. So this is basically to help you to run in your Spring Boot application, right? So this is helpful for you to do quick testing. Right? So you know that this bean is not recognized, command liner is not recognized, application. So the best way is to go to source and say organize imports, or if you are a keyboard geek like me, you just say Control-Shift-Ola. So when you do that, what happens is it goes and organizes the imports, right? So it takes a minute, then it is asking you which application context, choose the Spring application context, finish it. So you can see that it has completely organized its import, okay? So it understands these things. Now that's said and done, so I need to put in another semicolon, otherwise the statement won't stop. Okay? So this is the structure. So I have an arg and then I finish the arg. So this is function, right? I don't know if Tin had time to teach you function. The moment you say
excuse me.
yes.
Ma'am, could you possibly record this part? Some of us are still trying to
Yeah,
troubleshoot.
I know. I'm recording this. It will be on the
It's
immediately
not
pushed to
showing
YouTube.
it's
Yeah,
recorded. That's why.
yeah. That's because I'm using a different tool because I want to push
Oh,
that to YouTube. Don't worry.
okay, okay. Thank you. Sorry on
No
that.
worries, no worries. It's good to check with me, right? Yeah. So I want this on YouTube because I want you to immediately access it, and YouTube is the best way that I can do that. Okay. So so you can see that you have created this, right? So now you can test if your user object was created. So you can say user. Okay. So call the object, which is your demo object. Call this as u is equal to new user. Okay. So you can create the object. You can use the constructor. So I think all of these things are strings, right? So I'm going to say one. Name is Surya. Starting to bash myself first. Too fast. Okay. Then I have so let us call this as user 1. Okay. And then I want to type in SYSO. So u1 dot toString. Okay. So this is for the user 1. And then what I do is I basically try to create a few instances and test if everything is okay. So I'm going to create u2 here. Okay. So all I remember is my first good morning was from Chua. So Kiat was very pleasant. Then I have Martin. Cheers. Yeah. Okay, so we have some user instances that we have created, and then content wise I've just printed them, right? So u1 and u3, and I want to see if the code works. Okay. So all you do is restart the Spring Boot again. Okay. This time I should be able to see the data that is created. So I select the demo application, right click, say run. Do you see this recording symbol here on the screen? So that basically means I'm recording. Okay. So in case you get anxious, I know you can, right? So because everything is new, you would like to worry. Right. So if you see this recording script, this basically means I'm using a Screenomatic, which is much more powerful to push into the site, right? So that's why I got a paid license for it. I'm using it. I think I'm using it for 10 years now. It's my good old friend. So so you can see that u1, u2, u3, right? So this is the instances. So let's try to see if this runs. Right click and say run. You know you have to say Spring Boot app. You select that, okay? And then you can see on the console. I'm expanding the console. You can double click to expand it, double click to put it back, right? So this is Eclipse style, nothing new. So I got an error. So let me see. Okay, so this is basically saying port 8080 is already using. So this is a common mistake that you do. Even now I did it unconsciously. I'm already running an instance. I right click and say run as. It's going to get confused, right? So the best way is to restart it or stop this and run again. Okay? So this is your stop button, as you can see, but here I'm going to right click and say restart. Okay? Otherwise you can have only one at a time, right? So that's why it's saying you're running two things at a time and it is asking me to stop it. So I restarted the same. Now it has to pick the latest code and show me the examples. It has. You can see that it has executed the demo application. It has created the 3 users for me. So that's good enough for me to know that my boot application works and I'm ready to go to the next step. Okay? So you may feel lost, you may want these instructions and things like that. So you can see that there are 2 instructions that is uploaded. Okay, let me get the other one as well. Okay? So the first workbook is called as the Installation Spring Toolsuite workbook. Okay? And this is where some of you got lost. You wanted to know whether you should set up the path, what's the path, and so on and so forth, right? So this instruction is only for those who have issues. Okay? So when you have issues, please check if you have done the JDK right. Okay? And if you're using a Mac machine, you can do so by just opening a shell and testing if your Java version is correct. Okay? And if you want to try shell, it is only an additional thing. If you have been following me so far, if you are able to complete whatever code has been discussed, you don't have to worry. But some of you would like to try advanced things, right? If you want to try advanced things, in this installation instruction, I'm trying to show you how to do those advanced things. So you see, normally you get the JDK, you'll go through the wizard, you will install the wizard, and then it is done, right? But some of us would like to use Maven from the shell, which is also cool. Okay? Because if you want, you can use the IDE. If you want, you can use the shell and then run this as well. Even the Spring Boot app, you can run it from the shell. So if you want to try that, how to write shell and then use that, you have to set up path variables. Okay? How do you set up path variables? If you have Explorer, for example, if I have my Windows Explorer like this here, I select my PC, I right click it and say properties. Okay? And then this immediately opens up the control panel for me. I can go into advanced system settings. It gets me to the environment variables. It comes to the environment variable. You come here. Here is where you get the Java home, right? So you can set up the Java home as whatever version you have installed. I have a slightly older version, as you can see, JDK 191. Yours will be 251 or something, right? And also add that into the path. So if you want to see the Java home is nothing but a variable that comes to the JDK. Okay? Don't use the bin inside. And if you come to the path and you edit the path, you see that I've already added Java home with the /bin here. Okay? So these are standard styles, open source style. Not necessary you should follow this. You can directly come in and put, instead of using the Java home variable, you can directly say C:program files. That's also perfectly okay. So you can say C program files. You can copy the folder structure until the bin and put it here as well. Okay? Whichever way you do, it works. How do you test if it works? You have this window here. Type in your command, which opens up a command prompt. Okay? So, or you have to go to the administrator tools control panel and then click the command tool, right? So I like shortcuts, so I just type in command here. Or if you want, you can take a Windows Explorer, right? C drive. So here I want a command. What you can do is in the address bar, just type command. That also opens up a shell. Right? So it opens up on C, as you can see. Just say Java -version. Then you know which version of Java you're running. Okay? So this will help you to connect to Maven tool later on. Okay? So this is done only if you want to do shell-based programming. Otherwise, you don't have to do this. Okay? So that's for the installation instruction part, which is about the shell. Okay? So this is what I'm talking about. What you have to focus on is the STS installation. So we did the STS installation. We did the Spring IO tool. We extracted it. We created shortcuts. So all the steps are recorded here. Okay? So that should get your installation starting. Then the next thing that we did was we started the Spring Boot application. So for that, I've done another workbook which is called as workbook 01. Okay? So here I talk about all the things that I was doing in this video as well. Okay? So I may talk about some additional stories just as a good to know thing. Okay? It's not mandatory to read all those things. Don't get panicked. Okay? If you want to understand how the menu works, which is the getting started menu, I've given you some tutorial links here. You can try that. So basically what we are using is the Spring Initializer. How you do that? You say file, new, Spring Boot, it starts. So I walked you through this wizard. I walked about all the different things that you got to set it up. I also spoke about how you can edit your starters later. So you can check the video and check this. And you see, Spring Boot is helping us with different archetype, right? So when we simply say finish, there are many things that Spring is doing behind the screen. It's getting the project workspace ready. It is making assumptions about the libraries. It's also doing a lot of non-functional things like getting the security part connected, health check, configuration. A lot of things are happening behind the screen. So if you want to understand what is happening behind the screen, give a quick read. Then I just gave you an example. If you want to create MVC project, how you do it. You want to create a Jpa project, how you do it and all that. So we're going to try this on the afternoon lecture. So don't worry about the example part. I'll give you a detailed instruction for the Jpa part later. Okay? But this is for starters. And then here I showed you how to start the Spring Starter project. I walked through the Starter project wizard. I've got detailed description for these things. Okay? And then I give you an example. So how the Pom file looks like, how the configuration looks like, which is the demo app just we did. I think I created a model class called customer here. In the demo I created something called user. Doesn't matter, you can create any class and then try it off. And then I try to create a simple test whereby I can check if the objects are getting created. Okay. So you see I've done this for 30-40 minutes, but I think I'll give you until 1 o'clock for you to go have lunch, settle this, then come back, and then of course we'll discuss any other things that we have, right? So for now what I'm going to do is